led to a conclusion that is reasons for the Roman persecution. This lesson has since been removed, but documentation, which is in the possession of WND and a few other news organizations, confirms that the lessons existed. Critics contend that this ability to change content on a whim to evade scrutiny or accountability is a persistent risk with a system like C-Scope. An organic curriculum, if regulated, might be advantageous, but without transparency, these types of occurrences will likely be more frequent. The fears of some that C-Scope is replacing textbook, a claim denied by the Texas SBOE members, Thomas Ratliff, who appeared justified if governing board minutes were considered. In addition to outlining when and under what circumstances C-Scope would communicate with the TESCCC governing board pertaining to textbook assignments and textbook alignments with Pearson, McGraw-Hill, etc., were discussed and delayed with the support of the governing board members. Some attendees lamented even having to align C-Scope content with textbooks, since the mission of C-Scope is to change instruction in the classroom. The TESCCC has now asked the Texas Attorney General to make its minutes exempt from public information requirements. Now, what you have here, ladies and gentlemen, and for the record, the TESCCC is the Texas Education Service Center Curriculum Collaboration. That's a governing board over Texas public school systems. And what you've got going on is a group of educators in one of the most conservative states in the Union that have managed to push this agenda-driven, no paper trail manifesto of indoctrination on these kids. Why would you pick Texas? When you have a state that's so conservative you can't make headways, you have to start changing the minds of the young. If there's no parental oversight, because you can't check up on what they're teaching, this is insane. And now the Obama administration wants to push this as part of a federal agenda? Make this kind of thing mandatory in order to keep getting federal dollars? Ladies and gentlemen, the Founding Fathers never saw the education of our youth as something the federal government should be involved in at all. The very fact that we have a Department of Education is questionable at best. Of course, public perception is that the federal government should be interested in educating our youth and should have a role in helping to provide funds for cash-strapped local governments that simply can't afford to provide the best quality education. That's the excuse for sending the money, but then what does the government do anytime they send money? Well, they didn't demand to have more of a say. One has to ask the question, are we getting anything for it? It seems like we've devolved as far as test results are concerned. Some would even say that the government will reward you for being an idiot. Seems like that's what we're pushing for. My point being here that the information on SAT scores has come out, and it seems that academic test scores have hit a record low. The average reading score for the SAT college entrance exam hit a 4-decade low in 2012, dropping from 520 in 1972 to 496 in 2012. That's a 34-point decline. Now, according to the College Board, which administers the test, 57% of the test takers scored so low that they would likely be unsuccessful in college. The average SAT writing score also fell 9 points since 2006. That's when testing began for writing. The SAT scores certainly aren't the only metric pointing to a dumbing down of the American population. The United States now spends twice as much money on education as it did 30 years ago, adjusted for inflation, of course, with lower test scores to show for it. Unfortunately, American college students aren't faring much better either. The college dropout rate has increased from 1 in 5 in 1960 to nearly half today. Only 56% of American college students now graduate within 6 years. Only 56% of American college students get a 4-year degree in 6 years' time? We've really got to stop and think about our priorities here, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get the federal government out of our education. Let's get our local governments back in charge, and let's start teaching core curriculum values, and let's bring civics back in, and let's teach the Constitution. Shall we? A little good news, a little shining beacon, seems to be that according to a high-profile interview that's recently been given, sheriffs can block federal gun control laws. Well, they may not be able to do much about the laws, but as far as the enforcement's concerned, here's the story. A certain high-profile former sheriff who once sued the U.S. government over its gun regulations and won says that it is indeed the local sheriff who will have to defend Americans when it's the Fed starts banning and confiscating guns. Richard Mack, a former sheriff in Graham County, Arizona, joined with then Raviala County Sheriff. I hope that's proper pronunciation. If not, I apologize. Anyway, the former county sheriff, Jay Prendez, in a lawsuit against Washington when Bill Clinton demanded sheriffs enforce provisions of the Brady Bill Gun Control Act. Now, isn't it funny how the Democrats want local law enforcement to enforce some laws, but then want local law enforcement to have no involvement whatsoever when it comes to things like immigration laws? Just an interesting observation. Let's continue. They won that lawsuit, and since then, he's been at the front of a movement that highlights the responsibilities of local sheriffs. Now, as Washington gears up to consider emperor's plans to limit guns, require fingerprints and registration, impose additional taxes and fees, ban particular features or functions outright, and even compensate weapons of self-defense, Mack has told a series of people, anyone who'd listen really, that there's hope remaining in local law enforcement. It's not complicated either. He said, quote, "Gun control is illegal and it's against the Constitution." He went on to say that people don't realize is that the Second Amendment was designed to protect us from the power of the federal government. He went on to say that with the excerpt that sheriffs across the country to defend the rights of ordinary Americans. Bottom line is here that he says, quote, "When I was sworn in many years ago as a deputy sheriff, I swore to uphold and protect the United States Constitution." Basically, this man is on the forefront, and he's telling you that there is a local law enforcement who has the right to ignore certain federal mandates if they're unconstitutional. Also, late word came in later this afternoon that there is a growing consensus. Blah. Okay, it's not like I'm trying to talk here. There's a growing consensus among deputies and sheriffs in several states that they're willing to stand up to any new legislation that might attempt to curtail Second Amendment rights. In fact, one of the latest reports, a group of sheriffs from the state of Kentucky have joined this. You hear the mainstream media reporting this story like all of America is ready to jump on the take the guns away bandwagon, when in truth, the real strength here is Americans are getting behind the Second Amendment, because most average, everyday Americans understand that the more guns that are in the hands of law-abiding citizens, the less violent crime that occurs. I think a lot of us also understand that disarming the citizenry here is not about protecting the children as much as it is protecting those who would challenge the Constitution. Those who would challenge American sovereignty. In a bit of local news, for those of you who are not familiar with the story, there's a couple of brothers here in Roane County who are infamous. Rocky Joe and Clifford Leon Houston. They've had a very well documented series of run-ins with local law enforcement. Over the weekend, they have been arrested yet again. And today, a magistrate judge set detention hearings for one of the Roane County brothers, but refused to do so for the other one after an outburst in court. One-time double murder defendant Rocky Joe Houston and Clifford Leon Houston were both arrested this past Friday night in Roane County on federal gun charges. While Leon accused the U.S. Magistrate Judge Bruce Guyton, via his attorney, of an unspecified conflict of interest, he did not disrupt the court proceedings, so Guyton set a Friday hearing on whether he should remain jailed pending the trial. Rocky Houston, on the other hand, yelled at Guyton that his constitutional rights were being violated and refused to answer perfunctory questions during his arraignment today. Guyton ordered him jailed with no detention hearing or trial date set. Now, for those of us who are familiar with it, the conflict of interest and the constitutional civil rights part of the standard playbook that the Houston boys have been using to stay out of trouble for some time. Now back to the story. Rocky Houston actually faces a charge of gun possession by a felon, and Leon Houston faces a charge of gun possession while smoking pot. That's according to the federal court records that were unsealed today. The U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives made the arrest, serving 3 search warrants at the Houston family farm in Roane County. According to records released today, authorities had been watching Rocky Houston's home for months. A hidden camera mounted on a power pole at the family's property videotaped Rocky Houston carrying a rifle and a pistol on at least 7 occasions in October and firing the rifle at least once. According to the arrest warrant that was unsealed today, Agent Jason Dobbs of the ATF wrote that particular bit of information.